they just got caught recording illegal audio. She has just completely bumbled so many things, and she has no idea what happened, and she's been trying to find it, but she's found nothing.
Did Blake Lively's entire case just unravel with one strategic move? Brian Friedman has reportedly presented shocking new evidence that directly undermines her retaliation claims, shaking the core of her lawsuit. This revelation isn't about a single flaw. It questions whether Blake crafted the role of victim while quietly steering the narrative all along. Many now believe this latest twist could end the legal battle before it even begins. Was this ever about truth, or has it been strategy disguised as sincerity from the very start? And did she finally get caught?
We've seen Friedman overshoot the mark and make these big egregious statements in the press, and then it kind of doesn't really amount to anything. Because I mean, right now it's very obvious they're not suing Blake into oblivion, which was, I think, his first big, bold statement. And I think too many times have we really built up this faith in them that they've kind of under-delivered on, and now we're just kind of in this lull of, Blake's dragging us along. And I don't know if, I know Perez was really confident that he thinks that this could potentially lead to a settlement between the two of them, but I don't know. I feel like Blake kind of has to go to trial, otherwise she's going to look like a total, idiot. And I feel like Baldoni has to go to trial in order to prove.
What happens when the very evidence meant to prove a case turns out to be illegal from the start? That's the question now surrounding Blake Lively's legal team, as the controversy shifts from what's inside the courtroom to how the evidence itself was obtained. The explosive claim is that her lawyers secretly recorded a private conversation with Steve Sitz without his consent, an action that could violate California's strict two-party consent law, which requires every participant to know and agree to being recorded. If that law was ignored, one reckless decision could dismantle the credibility of her entire retaliation case before it ever reaches a jury. But the issue doesn't end with legality. It's about manipulation and presentation. Reports suggest her team didn't release the full recording. Instead, they quoted selective snippets in a public filing, presenting them as if they told the whole story. Anyone familiar with selective editing knows how dangerous that can be. A few clipped sentences can transform context, twist intent, and paint an incomplete picture as undeniable truth. It's like hearing one heated phrase from an argument and deciding who's guilty without the rest of the conversation. That's the heart of the criticism now facing Lively's camp. On the opposing side, Sitz's team isn't staying silent. They've demanded the complete audio be released, accusing her lawyers of cherry-picking moments to control the narrative. Their message is blunt: release everything and let the truth speak for itself. The stakes are enormous. If the recording truly was obtained without consent, and if its contents were selectively showcased, Lively could face severe consequences beyond just losing credibility. She might face scrutiny for violating state law, while her entire case risks implosion. Yet despite growing pressure, her team continues to fight to keep Exhibit 1 sealed, citing concerns over negative press coverage rather than legal necessity. That decision only deepens suspicion. If the full audio genuinely supports her claims, why hide it? Why rely on curated transcripts instead of transparency? In court, partial truths often backfire, and Exhibit 1 is beginning to look less like vindication and more like concealment. That's where Brian Friedman enters the picture. He and his team argue that this so-called smoking gun doesn't prove Lively's case. It undermines it. They claim it exposes manipulation, not misconduct. And if a judge rules that the evidence is inadmissible due to how it was gathered, her retaliation narrative could collapse before trial even begins. The irony? The most damaging part might not be the legality itself, but what the full, unsealed recording could reveal: contradictions that threaten to unravel the foundation of her entire case.
Of all ironies, it turns out Blake Lively's been using illegal audio to cherry pick quotes against the Wayfarer parties, because of course she is. This one's a doozy. I got to get into this. And then we're also going to talk about retaliation claims that are falling apart, so stay tuned for that. But first, let's get to this is juicy. On Wednesday, Wayfarer asked for evidence submitted by Blake to be unsealed, specifically the audio tape of Steve Sarowitz. Now, as you'll see here in this second paragraph, the materials concern an alleged recording made by the witness of a conversation with defendant Steve Sarowitz without his consent. Plaintiff seeks to seal the audio recording in its entirety, although she purported to selectively quote from it a portion of her inner brief in the public unsealed version she filed with the court. Lively boldly claims she placed the substance of the relevant information from Exhibit 1 in the public record, flatly ignoring that the person recorded was without his consent. Mr. Sarowitz should be allowed to have the entire recording made public to ensure accuracy and provide context. Basically, he's like, no, girl. You're going to try to defame me? Play it all. I'm not asking you to hide that. You don't get to decide what to protect here. You just tried to expose me by cherry picking one piece of that audio. Release it all, girl. Let's hear it all in context. Why are you doing that? Good question. Good on Steve and the team for finally pushing this.
Why is one audio recording being fought over like a hidden weapon? That's the question dominating the courtroom as everything now centers on Exhibit 1. Blake Lively's legal team relied on this recording in her filings, using selective quotes to strengthen her retaliation narrative. But Brian Friedman isn't convinced. He's calling the evidence incomplete, misleading, and possibly illegal, turning Exhibit 1 from a supporting document into the focal point of a fierce legal battle. The controversy stems from how it was presented. Lively's lawyers quoted sections that favored her claims but never released the full recording, leading the defense to argue that the portrayal was distorted and stripped of crucial context. What followed was a high-stakes tug-of-war, with one side insisting on secrecy and the other demanding full disclosure. At the heart of it all lies a single question: what holds more weight, the right to privacy or the right to truth? The intensity escalated when the defense exposed when and how Exhibit 1 was first introduced. Lively's team quietly included it in a filing earlier this year, framing it as proof of hostile behavior, but the opposition immediately challenged it, alleging both incompleteness and illegality. Under California's strict two-party consent laws, every person in a conversation must agree before being recorded. If that requirement wasn't met, her supposed proof could legally backfire. Yet legality isn't the only issue. It's the missing context that's raising eyebrows. Insiders close to the case suggest that the unedited recording may not support Lively's claims at all. In fact, the full conversation could contradict key parts of her story, revealing inconsistencies between her selected quotes and the larger exchange. Imagine snippets implying one narrative while the complete tape tells another. That's why this single audio file has become the most contested piece of evidence in the case. Friedman's strategy isn't just to argue for Exhibit 1's exclusion. It's to expose everything. He's demanding that the full recording be unsealed and made public, confident that hearing every second could dismantle Lively's carefully constructed timeline. His approach targets not just what was said, but when it was said, because once the chronology of her claims begins to crumble, so does her entire retaliation narrative. In the end, Exhibit 1 has transformed from a piece of supporting evidence into a potential turning point, one that could decide whether Blake Lively's story stands or collapses under the weight of its own contradictions.
Feel that the recording was taken without his consent. Writing regarding the declaration, plaintiff seeks to seal information regarding the timing of the meeting and the context of the conversation recorded without Sarowitz's consent. Other than the witness's name and the name of the project the declarant worked on, none of the information reveals identities. So basically, the person who recorded it, I guess. Plaintiff improperly seeks to hide any context for the alleged verbal abuse, why the meeting with Mr. Sarowitz took place, when it took place, and what allegedly happened after the conversation. So apparently they're trying to avoid a bunch of context as to why this was even happening. Finally, plaintiff does not provide any explanation why Exhibit 1 to the declaration must be sealed, other than it would invite additional media coverage, which she is concerned will be adverse to her. However, it is well settled that generalized concerns of adverse publicity and reputational injury are insufficient to justify sealing records. More importantly, Lively herself is responsible for the substantial media coverage resulting from her decision to include alleged quotations from Exhibit 1, audio recording of Mr. Sarowitz. Certainly, any privacy interest belongs to Mr. Sarowitz, the person who was recorded without his consent. He should be permitted to have the public hear the entire audio recording and not be confined solely to Lively's flawed and out of context interpreted transcription of the audio recording. Amen, dude. Amen. Why does she always get to pick and choose what you guys get to see? But then she wants to see everything. That's why I think a lot of people didn't want to give her so much information, because they're not going to be honest about the information. They will make it whatever they want to make it. And that's what's so messed about this whole case. It's been such a waste, so disgusting on so many levels.
A retaliation claim lives or dies on timing. And right now, Blake Lively's case is hanging by that thread. When the sequence of events doesn't line up, the entire story begins to crack, and that's exactly the trap she's in. Her version claims she was hit with a smear campaign as revenge for calling out certain behavior, but there's an 8-month gap between her alleged complaint and the supposed retaliation. In legal terms, that's a fatal flaw. Jurors expect cause and effect to follow closely, not be separated by nearly a year of silence. According to Lively, the protected activity occurred at the start of 2024 when she raised internal concerns, planting the seed for the backlash that would later unfold. But the smear campaign she describes doesn't appear until late summer, 8 long months later, a gap that defense lawyers are calling a causation chasm. The situation becomes even worse when you factor in Lively's own public statements from that period. She openly said Phase 2 filming went smoothly, describing it as free of stress, conflict, or interference. Those are her own words, and they contradict the very premise of retaliation. If everything on set was running perfectly, where exactly was the hostile treatment she now alleges? The defense has already seized on this contradiction, arguing that her narrative is retrofitted, not real. They're painting her as someone connecting dots that were never linked in the first place, comparing her claim to blaming a neighbor for a storm that happens months after they've moved away. For jurors, that imagery resonates. Retaliation, by definition, is supposed to follow swiftly after the triggering event, not linger silently and reappear almost a year later. Timing doesn't just matter technically, it matters psychologically. When 8 months of calm pass before anything happens, doubt takes root. Was this truly retaliation, or just a reinterpretation of normal industry dynamics? The defense knows that by exposing this gap, they can transform her story from one of victimhood into one of calculated narrative control. Once the timeline collapses, every other piece of evidence loses strength because causation, the legal glue holding it together, comes undone. And this timing problem isn't isolated. It's part of a broader shift in her story. Over the course of the case, her account of when and how retaliation began has subtly changed, raising suspicions that she's adjusting details to make the puzzle fit. That shifting narrative may prove even more damaging than the gap itself, because it doesn't just suggest inconsistency, it hints at manipulation.
Now, Little Girl Attorney, who I'm a fan of, I would love to have you on. I saw her over on Elsie's channel. I want to full shout out and props to her. I want her to explain a little bit of this weighing in this issue and how this is kind of not a good thing for.
Nowhere have we seen them expressly state that the retaliation campaign, the online smear campaign, actually happened while filming. That means that the online smear campaign has to date back to 2023 through 2020, early 2024. And by Lively's own admission, there was nothing that she could say was harassing that happened on set for the Phase 2 of the filming. Then she must be alleging then that there was retaliation that happened during Phase 2 of the filming. And that we haven't seen any specific allegations of.
She specifically says that round 2 of shooting went smoothly and there were no problems. That's from her own lawsuit.
So that's curious, and I wonder how that's going to play out. The reason I think they're doing that is because some of us have been talking about how there is a causation issue with the amount of time that has gone by between the allegation of the alleged protected activity, which we're not 100% sure what she's alleging is a protected activity. Is it that January 4th meeting? Is it the 17-point list that was emailed in November? Is it the 30-point list that was orally discussed in the January 4th meeting? What exactly constitutes that alleged protected activity?
Great question.
In any case, even if you take the latest one, which would have been in January 2024, she has alleged that the online smear campaign started in August or after August of 2024, which in and of itself is about 8 months of nothing, where she alleges nothing happened, no retaliation happened. She hasn't actually alleged any retaliatory acts that happened between that period of time. Now she's saying that retaliation began while filming. So are you saying that you raised the complaint in January to the Wayfarer parties, and then there was retaliation during phase 2 of the filming, when you also alleged that there was no harassment, there were no problems on set? So what was the retaliation that happened during the filming?
When does a story stop evolving and start contradicting itself? That's the corner Blake Lively seems to be backed into now. Early on, she was confident. Filming had wrapped smoothly, she said, with no major issues during phase 2. That statement sounded final, clear, and unshakable. But then, somewhere along the way, her version shifted. Suddenly, she began suggesting that the very retaliation she complained about had started midway through production. Same timeline, 2 entirely different accounts, both coming from her side. That contradiction immediately sparked questions. Which version is real? Was production truly smooth, or was it hostile all along? Both cannot be true, yet both are part of her narrative now. Even insiders have started calling out the inconsistency, with one attorney bluntly warning that this isn't clarification, it's goalpost moving. And that's exactly what it looks like. By shifting the alleged start of retaliation back into mid-2023, Blake effectively tries to erase the damaging 8-month gap we talked about earlier. The adjustment makes it appear as though retaliation began earlier, conveniently closing the hole that once threatened to sink her case. But that maneuver comes with serious risk. To a judge, a story that keeps changing doesn't suggest improved memory. It signals manipulation. What once looked like an oversight now looks like a tactic. The difference between evolving testimony and collapsing credibility lies right there. Moving the goalposts might fill a gap in logic, but it empties a case of trust. Observers inside the courtroom have been blunt. This, during filming, claim feels like a retrofit, not a revelation. And when jurors catch that kind of shift, their patience evaporates. They stop seeing a survivor trying to clarify events and start seeing a strategist rewriting them. Credibility, already fragile, fractures with every inconsistency. The court's tolerance for contradictions is razor thin, and the public's even thinner. Every new version of her story makes her seem less like someone recalling trauma and more like someone editing a narrative under pressure. Imagine a trial moment where her 2 statements are played back to back, one confidently claiming everything went smoothly, the other insisting retaliation was secretly unfolding during that same period. It would sound like 2 different Blakes in the same courtroom, canceling each other out. Jurors don't need legal training to sense when something feels off. They'll read it as calculation, not truth. And once that perception sets in, every other claim she makes will face an uphill climb. Her credibility becomes her biggest liability. That's why this contradiction isn't just a technical flaw. It's potentially the crack that brings her entire case down. Because if her timeline can't be trusted, neither can her motives. And as this showdown looms, one question hangs heavier than ever. Who gets destroyed first, Blake, whose story is starting to crumble, or Justin Baldwin, who might now have the perfect opening to turn the tables and expose her strategy for what it really is?
That's the problem. She's never had an idea because there wasn't any, and she's constantly fishing for it because she's trying to make one out of thin air. If we're being honest, right? That's what I really think is happening here. This is really wild that she's doing. I mean, so really process that, because this letter kind of changes things when they bring this up 8 months after her alleged protected activity. So yeah, that January 4th meeting or the 17 list of demands, courts want to see retaliation happen pretty soon after the trigger. So 8 months, that's a causation gap that a lawyer could drive a truck through. So this joint letter sort of reveals that in a way. This during filming is really actually her attempting to move the goalposts, a total shift, dragging the timeline back to 2023, early 2024, right into filming, so she can then close the gap and make it easier to argue retaliation later. It's all a legal tactic. So as little girl attorney commented, she's admitted nothing happened during phase 2 of filming. So why? That's ridiculous that she did that. Now she's going to spin and say, oh no, it did happen during filming. But that looks like just a pivot to, help the summary judgment, et cetera, and we keep the moving stories, et cetera. But it just raises the bigger question now of like, if these facts keep changing, how solid was her story in the first place? Like, that's the real reality here, right? All of this is now questionable to me, as it always has been, I think, for a lot of us who are actually following this case as closely as we are. She has just completely bumbled so many things, and she has no idea what happened, and she's been trying to find it, but she's found nothing.
Is this case truly about justice, or is it about who gets destroyed first in the public arena? That's what it feels like now. The deeper this battle between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni goes, the less it resembles a legal pursuit of truth, and the more it looks like a high-stakes career showdown. One side walks away vindicated, the other walks away marked forever, and both risk losing as much in reputation as they stand to gain in the courtroom. With trial dates looming and whispers of settlements circling, everything is building toward a confrontation that neither can afford to lose. For Blake, pushing forward means dragging every contradiction, those shifting timelines, the Exhibit 1 controversy, the questionable recording, right into the open. Once those pieces are dissected under cross-examination, they don't just wound her case, they wound her image. Every inconsistency chips away at the credibility that protects her stardom. If a judge decides these aren't just small discrepancies, but signs of a deliberately staged narrative, she risks turning a legal claim into a public implosion. But Baldoni's danger runs just as deep. Simply being accused in a case like this can leave a lasting stain. Even if he wins, the shadow lingers, living online long after verdicts fade. That's why his team is holding on to Brian Friedman's revelation, the disputed audio recording, as if it's their lifeline. If the full version contradicts Blake's account, it could end everything before trial, sparing him months of scrutiny and headlines. Friedman's strategy is clear. Flip the weapon Blake introduced and use it against her. But that raises a new round of speculation. What's next for her? Will she double down, fight to keep Exhibit 1 sealed, and gamble that no one ever hears the full context? Or will she pivot once again, rewriting her story in hopes of regaining lost credibility? Every option carries a cost. Push too aggressively, and it looks desperate. Rewrite again, and it looks fabricated. Stay silent, and she loses control of the narrative. It's a brutal game of legal chess, with cameras rolling the entire time. Picture it. Two careers orbiting the same courtroom, every motion dissected by the press, every headline shaping public opinion. If Exhibit 1 gets unsealed and the contradictions spill out, the narrative of a smear campaign could explode back into the spotlight with twice the impact. Blake wouldn't just risk losing her case. She'd risk becoming the face of manipulation, her credibility reduced to rubble. In that outcome, one side might emerge cleared while the other carries scars that never fade. Because beneath all the legal jargon and PR statements, the real question isn't just who wins. It's how this fight spiraled so far, and what's truly motivating the choices being made behind the scenes. This isn't merely about retaliation or defamation anymore. It's about control, about which story the world believes. And the new evidence doesn't just threaten to topple one lawsuit, it exposes how celebrity legal teams can twist the very idea of truth. An audio clip that was allegedly recorded without consent, sliced into selective quotes, and presented as fact becomes the perfect symbol of how justice can blur into performance. Critics are already calling the entire process manipulative, even disgusting, arguing that what's unfolding isn't a pursuit of truth, but a spectacle of power. So, the question remains, are we witnessing a case about justice, or just another Hollywood war where noise drowns out the truth while two careers hang in the balance?